Well, it's almost 11 o'clock, so I think it's a good time to start. First of all, thank you very much for giving up some of your time in what in Madrid is a kind of late Saturday morning. And just to remind you that we have Q&A options on the screen. So if you want to put a question there, one of my colleagues, Rebecca, thank you very much, Rebecca, for being here today, will also help me with that, because obviously I'm going to be focusing mostly on, on the presentation. But if you do have any questions or queries you want to ask or to introduce, you can use the Q&A box in order to do that. So you can see that, yeah, okay, so the Q&A box there. You've also got the chat box, which you can follow, but if you have any specific questions that you want to ask, that's really the place to go. So without further ado, thank you again for joining us. And this is the third of a series of sessions in which I'm looking at exploring visual resources. In the first session, we looked at animation. In the last session, we looked at using film trailers. And today, I'm going to be looking at using short films. Now, there are different types of films here, but the emphasis on these is that they are short, coherent films we can adapt in different ways. And my emphasis in all these sessions really is about taking advantage of the very creative and stimulating and sometimes provocative materials that we can find online nowadays. Almost everything we're looking at you can find on YouTube. But I think it's a skill that we can develop, which is identifying the kinds of materials that work well, and also developing our abilities as teachers to think of ways to use them. What kinds of questions work? What kinds of activities can we link to visual materials? How can we best exploit them? How to manage them? And I'll be talking about this a little bit later when I mention a little bit about textbooks. And my own feeling is that we not only need to find materials that stimulate our students, but also materials to supplement the kinds of things that can be a bit dry and even a little bit boring in textbooks. So I'm thinking that this is not just to give you some examples, but hopefully to help you think about how to use these kind of materials in the future and incorporating them into your classes if you think they could be useful, and also developing our individual skills at exploiting resources. What, as I said before, how do we use them? What kind of things do we do? And just to kind of look at that in a bit more detail here, I think that we've become very aware that visual literacy and the forms of media that appear in a wide variety of platforms nowadays, they do tend to be very brief and short. And for those of us who are older, that's often quite difficult because we probably grew up with a much longer kind of experience of visual text. And I mean, you know, use of visual text is a very kind of general one for anything that we can watch. And whereas most of our younger students particularly, live in a world where brevity is key, where things are very short. The information comes in a package, and that's something which I think we shouldn't resist, and we certainly shouldn't see that as a bad thing. I think part of our work is to harness that, to see how can we turn that to our advantage. And I think this kind of visual narratives do several things. They can make language, these 5 points I've listed here, to do with relevance, to do with memorability. And you know, these are very general terms, but I think if we look at what those mean in practice, I think we can see that it's about language making sense. It's about retaining language after the class. It's about seeing how and when language is used. It's about engagement as well, about becoming personally engaged with the topic through the text we're watching or through the film we're watching. And it works in a communicative sense so that it makes us want to express our ideas, express our responses, and express our feelings. So the kind of materials I'm looking at, I think, have the great advantage that they do all these things. They also generally have the advantage that they're stories. And there are many different types of stories, and I think that we should never underestimate how powerful stories are in the classroom. They provide many different forms of involvement, but also they're coherent, they're complete, they're attractive. So always bear in mind that the narrative is an immensely powerful tool. I'd like to pick up particularly on the idea of memorability, because it's something that interests me a lot and something I feel we sometimes don't pay enough attention to. And I love this graphic, which is shows how memorability, retention of language is significantly increased if we can combine two of the things on the left with an emotion. Now, this has been studied. There's been a lot of research about how people remember, and if you can use two of the things on the left and combine that with an emotion, most studies show that the retention of language can increase by as much as 50%. So one of the reasons I'm very interested in this kind of material is they do actually automatically involve two of these skills, so engagements, visual and auditory. And if the text or the film we're watching induces an emotional response, we're off to a very good start in terms of making our lesson memorable and helping students remember the language that they experience through the lesson. So I personally love this graphic, and I always keep it in mind when I'm thinking about materials. How can I combine at least two of those four, and if possible, an emotion as well? And emotion doesn't have to be something bad. I mean, something bad. I mean, laughter is an emotion. So if you can make people laugh, you're also completing that kind of group of aspects. So I'd like us to look at a few different films today, a few different shorts, and I thought we could begin with something very topical. I mean, it's that time of year, it's holiday time, or it's Christmas, whatever the term you want to use is. And there are a lot of materials available that can play with or introduce the topic of that at this time of year. And I've chosen a short film, which I think links nicely to this. And so maybe if any of you have classes next week, you could use this if you want to. By the way, I have created a Drive file with the shared materials. So most of the materials we're looking at today, you can access through a Drive link, which will be in the chat box later if it isn't there already. So the things we're going to look at now, you can find on in that link. So I think one very useful tip for using this kind of visual material, short films, short narratives, is give students a question that allows them to watch. Now that might seem really obvious, but actually I think one of the dangers, and I see it a lot with prepared materials, is that if we give students too many questions to think about when they're watching, they don't watch. They're paying attention to the questions on the page or on the sheet, and that really negates the whole point of experiencing the visual text, because if they're concentrating on answering questions, then they're not going to be focusing on the picture. So I think it's really important to begin with a good gist question. And so for the film I'm going to show you first, I start with this very simple gist question that allows the students to concentrate on the story without being distracted. And this is a very simple one. It's just how many hours, how much time passes? How much time passes between the beginning of the story and the end. You need to emphasize this isn't the length of the film, it's the narrative length. So how many hours pass between the beginning and the end of the story? So if you just excuse me whilst I change to the connection, the internet connection, to show you this first film we're going to look at today. Okay. Right, so just going to share the video with you and sound. It's very important to remember to share the sound. Okay, so here's the first film that we're going to be watching.
It was Christmas Eve, and everyone in the Thomas family was dreaming sweet dreams. Nicky and Debbie were dreaming about what Santa would bring them. Mr. Thomas was dreaming of a new bat. Mrs. Thomas was dreaming of something else. Finally, of course, we have Mog. Mog was not dreaming sweet dreams. Mog was having a nightmare. As the neighbours gathered, the fire chief told everyone how Mog had saved the day.
She deserves a medal.
I think she'd rather have an egg.
But there was no egg for Mog. There was no Christmas at all. At least, that's what they thought. But everyone else thought that if the Thomases and Mog can't have a Christmas, they can share ours. So that's exactly what they all did.
There you go, Mog.
Okay, just to go back to just going to go back to my PowerPoint to show you some aspects of this. Activity. So that was, as you remember, this was the gist question. And, you know, as I said, it's pretty obvious, but I think you will have noticed that you didn't need to read the question. You could just bear the question in mind and focus on the story, which after all is a really, I think is a really cool story. And I usually start with this, particularly as I want students to maybe distract them for a few minutes before we start talking about what happens in the film. And normally I find that the prediction that most people agree that it's somewhere between 12 and 18 hours. I mean, you can debate it because it depends on how long you think they spent cleaning up the house. But I think in terms of the narrative, we're looking at about, from 10 o'clock at night till maybe 2 o'clock the following afternoon, something like that anyway. Now, with this film, you can use it to discuss topics like advertising. And this is an interesting one to raise as a question with students. What kind of commercials work at different times of year? What are they trying to sell us? I mean, in this case, it's a supermarket, but they're not really selling us food. So what are they selling us? Are they selling us a feeling? Are they selling us aspiration? So that can be the interesting point of discussion if you just want to use the film as a kind of topic base. I think when you look at short films, one thing they need to do to be effective is to be very careful with how and effective with in how they use time, events, and narrative. Because if a short film doesn't contain those elements, it often fails if it's a story because we don't really see it as a single shape. So I think when you look at a film, you're asking yourself, what kind of narrative is happening here? And as a result, what kind of language can I exploit through this? Now, in this particular case of the mob case, it seems to me that it's a really good opportunity to look at actions and consequences. That this is the entire film is about things that cause something else to happen. This is the calamity, that every action has a reaction, and most of those reactions are pretty bad, up until the end, where the reaction is a very positive one. So bearing that in mind, if we look at this particular film, sorry, I was trying to find my cursor's gone AWOL. Oh, there it is. It seems to me that we can begin with a matching activity, which identifies the things that happen. And so students match 1 to 7 with A to G. So they have the narrative order of 1 to 7, and then they have to decide what were the consequences of these actions. So that introduces the idea of actions and consequences. Now we can work with that in terms of language. If we look at the, here are the answers, by the way. This is on the link I sent, that I'll send you. So these are the answers, but they don't contain linkers of any sort. So what I then do is to get students to combine them by using these kind of linkers so that they actually are working on sentence structure, on expressing the relationship between an action and a consequence. And you could add more to this. I chose these fairly randomly, but I think it's a nice way of doing a little writing exercise where students are working at sentence level, maybe improving their ability to connect ideas. So that's the first step. But then you could ask yourself, well, when we talk about things that happened, another way we talk about things that happened is we talked about what didn't happen. So a logical step for me there is to move from this to third conditionals. So you can take exactly the same texts and now get your students working with third conditional structures to rephrase. So it's a good FC kind of B2 exercise to revise rephrasing as well. And then the students go through the same narrative order, but this time they're transforming the sentence, the ideas into conditionals. So we've moved, I just put these up because they're the ones you can see, that most of these follow the same structure. Some are a bit more challenging because you also have passive tenses, and that's a little bit more challenging depending on the level, but it's good because you're actually thinking about how to use passives in third conditionals. And the nice thing is also we have a happy ending there. But I think what's kind of one of the things that works really well with this activity is it makes a connection between grammar and images. What I was talking to you about before, about establishing a visual link to a conceptual link so that memorability plays in. And if students can remember the images they were seeing as they're doing this exercise, they probably got a visual image in their minds. And that is linking the grammar to the image. And I think that's something which significantly aids memorability, as I mentioned before. And if you come back to this, for example, if you go back to the film a little bit later, a week later, try it for yourself. See how many things the students can remember, and ask them to express them as conditionals. And if the research and if my experience are right, then you should find that they remember a lot more than they would have done if it was just a textbook grammar third conditional exercise. So, hopefully that can kind of show you the way that the experience of enjoying a film doesn't have to be overloaded with comprehension questions. You can actually take advantage of that enjoyment and then direct it into something that is rather more pedagogical, that actually works with vocabulary or works with grammar, works with linking words on the back of that. So I think the key thing is to think carefully about how to take full advantage of a good visual text. Don't overload it with questions at the beginning, or make students anxious about understanding when they can really basically sit back and enjoy it. So that's the first one we're going to look at. I'm just going to quickly see if there's any comments or I should. Okay, great. So we can move on from there. So we're going to go next. I'd just like to comment for a couple of minutes about the reason why I'm so keen to get these kind of materials into my classes. And I think that the reason I came up with 4 main headings. I think the kind of short films we can find online give us real topics. They can be linked to real life, language which is used in real communication. And I have to say that I often find these things lacking in textbooks. Of course, textbooks, there are a lot of very, very good textbooks. They're very carefully thought out. They cover a syllabus, they cover a language aspects as they're supposed to. But my feeling is that the textbooks are increasingly adenine, that they're increasingly devoid of real interest. And I think that there are reasons for that, which I don't really want to go into here, but I think that there's a danger that textbooks remove more and more topics for various reasons, and the results can be that it's pretty deadly. You can start a unit and find that the introductory material, or even some of the textbook material, is not very motivating. I mean, this is a personal opinion, and I that's my caveat. It's my opinion, and obviously it's not necessarily the right one or the only one. But I do think that a lot of the textbooks we use are not very good at introducing topics, themes, language in a way that makes students want to get into it. So I think these kind of films we're looking at today can be a complement, at the very least a complement, or in some cases they can even substitute some of the materials that we find in our textbooks. So just to show you an example of this, of another film which I'm very grateful to a student friend of mine, Carolina Vázquez, for pointing me in the direction of this film. And it's a film called Identity, and it's about people and masks. It's actually about quite a lot of things, but one of the main topics is people and masks. And so I introduced this by, sorry, we'll come back to that. I introduced this by getting students to discuss these questions about people wearing masks. So here are 4 fairly familiar ones for different reasons. And then introduce the idea of, are these people wearing masks? And to get into the topic of how do we show ourselves to the outside world, to the social world, to our friends, to our family, to our colleagues, and to hone in on that idea of, well, what is a mask? In the first set of pictures, a mask is something very clear and physical, but are there other kinds of masks? Are there other ways in which people feel they have to wear a mask, or society forces them to wear a mask? And the film Identity, again, avoiding those kind of complicated comprehension questions, I would just do something very similar with this and just ask students to think about why are people wearing masks in this film? Just a very simple gist question like that. Why are people wearing masks? And here is the film.
Today, I found the truth.
If you want food, do it instead. Not
Good morning, class. In today's lesson, we will be speaking about Plato's allegory of the cave. In Plato's allegory, he talks about human beings living in a cave. All their life, from their childhood, they've been chained up in such a way that they cannot move their bodies, and all they can see in front of them is a dark wall. Because they have never been outside of this cave, all they know about life is this dark wall. However, one day, a slave is released, and he discovers a whole new world outside of the cave. And because he is now the enlightened one, his job is to come and free those that are still trapped in the cave.
Look, think about it like this. The front row consists of kings, bishops, queens, pretty much the people in charge of the country. The second row is made up of pawns. The pawns are the least important and are pretty much what the leaders use to protect and benefit themselves. They're meant to be used for your own advantage.
Don't forget your red mask. Put it on. And now I pass you on to Carla with the segment on the terrors of originality.
It's a red card.
Today, the truth found me.
Okay. As I was saying before, a friend of mine, a secondary school teacher, created a really elegant class lesson around this video for her class of 14, 15-year-olds, which is something which, I mean, an age group that I personally don't have very much contact with, but I was very impressed with her lesson because it was a very tactful way of allowing students to talk about a very important topic. So it had that very, not only communicative, but also very relevant to them. So you serve both purposes of developing their English, but also being able to express themselves about important topics. I did something a little bit different with this because the age group I was working with was more mixed. And sorry, I'm just going to make sure can you see the PowerPoint at the moment? Yeah, okay. So I did something a little bit different on the back of this film. By the way, you probably also noticed that there's other potential there for developing the Plato and the cave allegory. So there are quite a lot of ways you can work with this film. What I did was remember a lesson, well, not a lesson, an activity that was proposed by Mario Rinvolucri long time ago. And I'm talking about a long time ago. And he did a lesson where to get people to talk about personal topics, because it's obviously can be quite sensitive, or even people might feel a bit embarrassed about talking about their own feelings and experiences. And he came up with a really nice way of doing that, which is to ask questions which are answered with we, not I. For example, which of the following are true for you? Sounds as if you're going to be asked to answer in the first person. But what Rinvolucri did with this activity was to get students to write we answers. So they're thinking about something they did with somebody else, or something that they shared with someone else. And I think this is really neat because the kind of topics that come up in that film, a lot of them are about, image and particularly being a teenager, not just being a teenager, being an adult, but especially that kind of identity, process. So by shifting the question to what are true of you, plural, then the students begin thinking about something they experienced, but they were with somebody else. And that has, I think, a double effect. One, it activates a different kind of memory because it's remembering experiences you shared, but also it slightly takes away the barrier of, well, this is very personal. You can always deflect that by the fact you're talking about a group or two people or three people rather than yourself. So here are some examples of ways of doing that. We are part, so imagine yourself when you're 15 years old and answer these questions. We are part of a group of friends who, okay, well, that was me and my friend Alan. and we were five, very good friends. Okay, we like wearing the same clothes. Yeah, me and my friend Barry used to always kind of get the same jeans. So you're actually thinking about this topic of identity, about behavior, about peer pressure, all those kind of things, but thinking about it as a group, not as a kind of isolated individual. So I just wanted to show you that as a nice way maybe of working with a potentially sensitive topic. Okay, a couple more things I'd like to look at a little bit different. This is a resource of films based on photographs. I found this on the Time website. The magazine Time has a website with a thing called the 100 most important photographs ever taken, something like that. If you type in Time 100 photographs into Google, you'll find this website. What I love about this website is that the pictures are great for speculation. There are lots of images there that work with students, have to describe what they see, speculate about what they see. And this one, I've put in two examples. The one on the left, I've had marvelous explanations. Somebody said they thought it was kind of a crater on a planet, and the circle in the distance is the moon, or maybe even the Earth. And this is maybe on Mars with some kind and all kinds of wonderful explanations. It's actually a very highly magnified photograph of a drop of milk falling into a saucer. And it's a series of extraordinary high definition photographs that were made by an American engineer in the 1950s and 60s. The picture on the right is one that just asking people to speculate what's going on here. How old is this girl? Where is this? When is this? And in my experience, people will often say, oh, this has to be the 19th century, or it must be the Victorian period, and maybe it's industrial England. And so it comes as quite a shock to discover it's a 1920s, I think, photograph from the United States. And this is a girl who's about 12 years old, and she's worked the night shift in this factory. So the stories behind the pictures are really interesting, often very moving. And a lot of these are come with videos. So in fact, the video I'll show you is the video that explains the background to the picture on the right, to the picture of the girl working in a factory. And this is the video here. Sorry, got the wrong way. Okay, this time got it. Sorry, I just lost this one. I'm just going to find it again.
Three. 1, 2, 3.
It's back. Getting reacquainted with old.
In the early 1900s, the general population in those years had very little understanding of what was meant by child labor and child exploitation. kinds of jobs you would find children working in ranged from the mines, the factories, the cotton mills, to working out on the streets selling newspapers. Injuries, even deaths, were very common among children. The parents would often say that they needed the income that their children brought in, that that was what allowed them to continue to survive. A number of parents were advocates for child labor, and their children thought that that was the way life was. One of the first things the National Child Labor Committee did was to hire a photographer. They hired Lewis Hine, who was then their photographer for the next 2 decades. They sent him around the country to identify, find, and photograph children in exploitative situations. He promoted himself as a Bible salesman. He said he was bringing his camera along so he could photograph kids reading Bibles. A boy would say he was 13 when in fact he was 11, or a girl would say she was 12 when in fact she might be 9. The photograph is of a young girl, 10 or 11 years old. Her name was Sadie Pfeiffer, at a cotton mill in Lancaster, South Carolina. She's standing in front of a large loom on a long hallway, staring at and working hard on the job of selecting the quality products. She's probably worked most of the night. It's nearing the end of her shift. She stands there, iconic, as a representative of hundreds of other girls who are being treated just like her and who have no choice. That photograph raised the consciousness immediately. You see that photograph and you cannot look away from it. It doesn't say America. Lewis Hine's stark photographs influenced legislation over a period of roughly 35 years. This body of work on child labor represented how he thought and how he felt that children must not be exploited. He represents the most important photographer in terms of social advocacy and social change in the first half of the 20th century.
These, as I said, not all of the photographs have a film with it, but a lot of them do. And they're also great because they have a text that goes with it. And what I do with those texts in relation to the video, when you've got the picture, as I said, the pictures are great because they invite a lot of speculation and description, and often people are quite surprised when they come to find out the story behind the film. But there are also short texts on this website that you can very easy to copy and paste, and the kind of thing I do with it. And I mean, I'm saying this partly just to emphasize that creating these kind of materials doesn't have to be very time consuming. Another great plus of these sorts of websites is there's already a lot of material there, and simply by cutting and pasting or using the text, as in this case, this is the text that appears with the video, and you know it's a good paragraph of you know, information and background, and you can just customize it. I mean, I put at the bottom here some of the things you could do with this. Gap fill, just gap 10 words, or take out 5 words and do them as a multiple choice. Introduce some grammar mistakes and see if students can spot them. Cut up the text into 4 pieces and they have to put it back together in the right order. Look for synonyms, look for antonyms. And those kind of activities really don't take very long to prepare. And also you can use them again and again. But just to emphasize what I was saying earlier, this is a very upsetting topic, and it's a very delicate topic, and it's a very disturbing topic. And so I understand why you wouldn't find this topic in a typical textbook. I understand that, but that doesn't mean that we, with our own classes, knowing our students, knowing what they can do, what they want to do, and being sensitive to our students, we can introduce other topics. We can look at things like masks, identity, adolescence, being a teenager, child labor. These within our own classes, within the parameters and restrictions that we work with, there's no reason why these can't be materials for language learning. And I think they're, as I said at the very beginning, they're highly motivating and memorable. So I had a couple of other things to look at, but I have to keep those for another time. These are 45-minute sessions, so I'd just like to leave a couple of moments in case there are any questions anyone wants to ask. Just having a quick look here in the Q&A. Okay, you've got the address. Oh, thanks. Thanks, Rebecca. Rebecca's put up the address of the 100 photos. Have you got the Drive link there? Is that there as well? Is the Drive link for the shared document there? Let me just see if I can find it again. Where is it? Oh, here, okay. I'm just going to copy that link in again in case you couldn't find it earlier. You see that? Has that come through? So that's a link where you can find most of the material I've looked at today, plus probably a couple of other things that we haven't had time to work on. But if necessary, I'll add some other pages to that. So unless anybody has any particular questions you'd like to ask, I think we can wind up there. I hope you can take away something useful from today's session. I'm sorry if it's a little bit me just saying, these are things I've done, these are things I've done, but at the very least, I hope that can give you some ideas as to how you might be able to use this kind of materials in the future. And that's it. Thank you very much for joining us in TESOL-SPAIN today, and I hope you'll join us, join me for the final session in January, where I'll be looking at using commercials in classes. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Bye-bye.